Did slavery really make the West richer? Jump in, let's see what's going on.
Question: did slavery provide the platform for the enrichment of the West as we know today, or did it profit only a few slave owners?
Economics. Those who think of slavery in economic terms often assume that it is a means by which a society, or at least its non-slave population, becomes richer. Some have even claimed that the Industrial Revolution in Western civilization was based on the profits extracted from the exploitation of slaves. Rather than rehash a large and controversial literature on this issue, we may instead look at the economic condition of countries or regions that used vast numbers of slaves in the past. Both in Brazil and in the United States, the countries with the two largest slave populations in the Western Hemisphere, the end of slavery found the regions in which slaves had been concentrated poorer than other regions of these same countries. For the United States, a case could be made that this was due to the Civil War, which did so much damage to the South. But no such explanation would apply to Brazil, which fought no civil war over this issue. Moreover, even in the United States, the South lagged behind the North in many ways, even before the Civil War. Although slavery in Europe died out before it was abolished in the Western Hemisphere, as late as 1776, slavery had not yet died out all across the continent when Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations that it still existed in some eastern regions. But even then, Eastern Europe was much poorer than Western Europe. The slavery of North Africa and the Middle East over the centuries took more slaves from sub-Saharan Africa than the Western Hemisphere did, in addition to large imports of slaves from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe to the Muslim countries of North Africa and the Middle East. But these remained largely poor countries until the discovery and extraction of their vast oil deposits. In many parts of the non-Western world, slaves were sources of domestic amenities and means of displaying wealth with an impressive retinue, rather than sources of wealth. Often, they were a drain on the wealth already possessed. According to a scholarly study of slavery in China, the slaves there did not generate any surplus, they consumed it. Another study concluded, the Middle East and the Arab world rarely used slaves for productive activities. Even though some slave owners, those whose slaves produced commercial crops or other saleable products, received wealth from the fruits of the unpaid labor of these slaves. That is very different from saying that the society as a whole, or even its non-slave population as a whole, ended up wealthier than it would have been in the absence of slavery.
That's a good point. Because some people in the South were using slaves, doesn't mean the entire country is going to get wealthy. Only those that were using the slave were becoming wealthier. That's it. Those that were using slaves, those plantations, probably they will become wealthy. However, that is not a reflection of the country as a whole because it seemed like the country was actually losing money because of that.
Not only in societies where slaves were more often consumers than producers of wealth, but even in societies where commercial slavery was predominant, this did not automatically translate into enduring wealth. Unlike a frugal capitalist class, such as created the Industrial Revolution, even commercial slave owners in the American antebellum South tended to spend lavishly, often ending up in debt or even losing their plantations to foreclosures by creditors. However, even if British slave owners had saved and invested all of their profits from slavery, it would have amounted to less than 2% of British domestic investment.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It makes sense because it was less than the slave population was less than 2% of the American population. Even if you took all that money, all that profits, and put it back into the country, it will make almost no difference.
In the United States, it is doubtful whether the profits of slavery would have covered the enormous costs of the Civil War, a war that was fought over the immediate issue of secession. But the reason for the secession was to safeguard slavery from the growing anti-slavery sentiment outside the South, symbolized by the election of Abraham Lincoln. Brazil, which had several times as many slaves as the United States, and perhaps consumed more slaves than any other nation in history, was nevertheless still a relatively undeveloped country when slavery ended there in 1888. And its subsequent economic development was largely the work of immigrants from Europe and Japan. In short, Even though some individual slave owners grew rich and some family fortunes were founded on the exploitation of slaves, that is very different from saying that the whole society, or even its
Doesn't
non-slave
translate.
population as a whole, was more economically advanced than it would have been in the absence of slavery. What this means is that whether employed as domestic servants or producing crops or other goods, millions suffered exploitation and dehumanization for no higher purpose than the transient aggrandizement of slave owners.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically none of this really translate to the wealth of the country. Even though we were trading with some of the states in the South, that does not mean that we were becoming richer because of slavery. The case of slavery was more like a societal situation because a lot of countries they have slaves during that time. It's basically that a lot of rich people in the South they didn't want to let it go. They did not want to let it go, and I understand why. You having all these very hard jobs that it will be even hard to even pay some of the white workers. You need to make some profit, so you buy a slave. Or you take a mortgage or a loan on a slave. I think personally, when it comes down to slavery, I think this is a bit more. It's like beating a dead horse or just kicking a can down the road. At this point, nobody cares, man. Nobody cares. That thing already happened. Then we just put just just let it go. A lot of these people that they just want to talk about slavery as a political issue, that means that they don't have real solutions. They just want to leave or invent a boogeyman. I think when it comes down to these kind of issues, you really need to tackle the real problem. Why is it that certain sectors of the American people are not underdeveloped? Remember, if you have an iPhone in your phone, that doesn't. It means that you're not poor. I'm sorry, I don't have an iPhone and I have a job. If you have an iPhone, multiple iPhones in your hands, it's not about wealth. It's more about culture. And it's true. If you're surrounded by culture that is trash, you are don't expect your IQ to be as high. You might have to pay some of those. Um, Sadly, you might have to pay those bad behaviors later, because those behaviors don't really correct until you have to confront the reality that, hey, maybe the lifestyle that you had before is not the greatest, and that's what happened with a lot of folks. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. In the meantime, guys, I'll see you in the next one.